Noon or early evening, everyone. Good afternoon to the board. The Educational Services team is very pleased to be here to present our results report. The 2020-2021 results reports review in the study session, and this evening we'll be focusing on English language arts and mathematics. And thanks for the team being here this evening. So Dr. Pfeffer and Mr. Arnold and I will be providing most of the information this evening. However, we have our team members here to provide any additional information or answer any questions as well. So first of all, we're going to be beginning by setting the context, and then we are going to review indicators, we're going to have a review of data, and we're also going to highlight some of the actions that we have in place for targeting academics in English language arts and mathematics, and those actions that we have included in our Lcap. So as we begin with the context, as we know, last year we had school closures due to COVID. We began with distance learning from August through April, and then hybrid learning from April through June. Now, in 2020, we received a waiver in the spring for the CASP and LPAC. And then last year, during the 2020-2021 school year in spring, there was flexibility given to districts in regards to testing, whether that would be the CASP or we would use another diagnostic, another assessment for testing to get those results. If you look to the next slide, thank you, Dr. Pfeffer, a results report indicators. Traditionally, our indicators would be the CASP and ELA and math for grades 3 through 8 and 11. And we have our primary indicators, which are percent meets and exceeds standard or not met, and distance from standard. And there's also perspectives of progress like aspirational targets, which we have identified or the board has identified, and one-year change targets and those 5-year trend targets. Our report is going to be focused on the STAR reading and STAR math CASP potential levels for grades 3 through 8, in English language arts and mathematics, as well as the CASP, ELA, and math achievement levels in grade 11. Now, when we discuss or talk about the potential level, Dr. Pfeffer is going to provide additional detail in regards to what that means and how we can utilize the STAR assessment to predict how students could perform on the CASP. And one other thing before Dr. Pfeffer begins is just really highlighting that last year was just that 1 year in time that we're reporting on due to the fact that there was distance learning, there was hybrid, there wasn't as much instructional time. So just really want to highlight that before we move on and review the data. Dr. Pfeffer.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kovac, and good afternoon, board and cabinet. We're going to start by a review of English language arts results. We'll spend a little bit of time there. We'll pause for questions along the way, make sure we have that discussion, and then we'll move on to math results in the second half of our session here this afternoon. Again, as Dr. Kovac mentioned, this is a bit of a unique report. Really, it's designed to be a 1-year setup report with different targets, different discussions of data sets, looking to return to our traditional model, hopefully for next year. But right now, we want to be able to produce some information and state where we are as a district. So we'll start with some of the key findings from English language arts, and it's very clear into the data, and as you'll see here in a few moments, that COVID-19 did have an impact on student learning in Palm Springs Unified. There's no question to that. We know that that impact was felt more strongly at the younger levels of students, knowing that they have some different support needs than some of our older students and are still learning many of the skills and many of the strategies necessary for success in the future. When we start to look at comparisons between where our CASP projection is using STAR data or our 11th grade CASP results, we can see that there's differentials in those data points, and we'll talk a little bit about that momentarily. Now, STAR results do note some positive aspects as well. We have students that are close to the cusp of being able to move forward, percentages of students that with high quality first instruction and just very timely short intervention may be able to reach those levels of proficiency again very quickly. But it also pointed out to us that we have a need for multiple levels of intervention, and those are some of the things that you'll hear discussed as action items. High school results we'll touch on a little bit differently. They may be a bit deceiving on first notice, and we want to make sure that we're clear about those things. And we do still see some of those performance gaps present that we've talked about in previous gap analyses and those types of items, and we'll talk to that as well. So to give an idea as to where we are for current performance, we'll start with our reading CASP potential in grades 3 through 8th. The STAR assessments give scaled scores within their system, and part of what Renaissance is able to do with that data is they're able to extrapolate that forward to say, here's approximately where a student would score on CASP if they had taken that test in a similar time frame. So the percentages that you see here would be our potential distribution, if you will, if a student had taken CASP in these grades. So you can see that many of our students are scoring in that lowest band, projected to be in that level 1 scoring set. These are lower than what we would traditionally see in English language arts. And keep in mind that the test is reading based, so they didn't get a boost from writing skills necessarily as it relates to this. When we start comparing these results, though, to the 2019 CASP results in ELA, that's where we can start to see that differential. Now, I'll caution the board to consider this not as a direct comparison, but a comparison for conversation's sake. They're different measures, they're different tests. One's actual data versus a projection. But it still gives a general idea of what the impact might be. And as you can see, that difference between the circle item, which would be the 2019 result, and the square item, which would be that projected 2021 result, is a pretty striking difference, especially at our younger grade levels. If you think about it for reading, that makes a lot of sense. You have students still in grade 3 finishing up those reading skills to shift from learning to read to reading to learn. A lot of different intervention pieces that may have different responses in a distance learning environment that clearly had an impact. Also keep in mind that these students had at least a quarter of distance learning the prior year, which again would have an impact on results. Now it's important that we also look at benchmark monitoring levels. This particular measure gives us an idea of the different layers of intervention we might need. Those scoring at or above benchmark, if you think of a bell curve, they're at the middle section of that bell curve or higher, meaning basically that first instruction and high quality implementation should be able to get them to proficiency down the road with additional time. The other 3 layers are very different layers of intervention structures, some with a light and timely model on certain items versus that urgent intervention model where we'll need to do something significant. So you'll note that in English language arts, those numbers of students above the line on the chart are fairly similar to what we're seeing in that CASP potential, meaning that a lot of those students were scoring high enough where they were likely to succeed on the CASP in the same numbers. But a tiered intervention structure is something that we will clearly need as part of the system moving forward. As it relates to elementary and math, there's a few other contributing factors that we have to consider as we're talking about progress. The transitions to distance learning and the quick onboarding of digital learning systems definitely was a progress point for the district. It came with some stumbling blocks along the way, a lot of teacher learning, and really not enough time for teachers to fully become proficient at a lot of those skills. Although many of them onboarded them very quickly and very well, there was still a lot of learning going involved. And we know that for some students, that distance learning environment is not as beneficial as others. We also know that there were very high chronic absenteeism rates during the last school year. Students either not attending distance learning or attending for part of the time and leaving clearly impacted their access to material, and that makes a difference as well. In-person learning at the middle school is kind of a unique piece. You'll note that as it relates to the number of quarters that a middle schooler would have been on campus at the end of last year, we actually have 2 of the 3 grade levels that at most would have been on campus half of their middle school career. And that's if they took part in the hybrid learning model in the last quarter of the 2020-2021 academic year. So we see some progression points where we can see even in the data set that there are many students that have that potential to move forward well, We have some that need some significant support, but also through the onboarding and everything else that was done as part of distance learning, we were able to minimize some impact in losses as well. It doesn't necessarily show up in every grade. Clearly, third grade was more impacted than some of the other grades, but we do have some other components. At this point, I'd like to pause for a second and see if there's any questions about just the data set and the couple of items we've quickly discussed in English language arts for elementary and middle school.
Jim, as we talk about assessments, and this might be real soon in the game, are we continuing with STAR to see the consistency through the spring, or are we going to move back over to the CASP?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're actually going to have both in place. We're set up this year for 3 district-wide STAR screenings. We've already completed one on a welcome back, if you will, in the fall window. We'll be doing one shortly after the winter break, and then another one at the very end of the school year so that we have those 3 STAR data points through the year to track progress. Many of our schools will be using it in between to track intervention and see if those systems are working as well. At the end of the year this year, we are projected to go back to CASP as normal. CDE has given all indications that the plan is to roll that out forward, and as long as we have students on campus, we should expect that to happen. For those students in a distance learning environment, we'll likely still have some remote testing options, and we'll see exactly what those details are as they get flushed out by the state over these next couple of months.
And Dr. Pfeffer, may I just add something? So also what the board has received is the results from our first benchmark this year in the fall. So that's right behind the presentation. I wanted to make sure that you had that because I know we talked about that at the board retreat and wanting to have that data. So you have that information there.
Thank you.
And after screening window 2 and screening window 3, we'll generate similar reports so that you can see what that progress looks like.
Dr. Pfeffer, I just don't understand this potential by grade.
Sure.
It's a projection. How do we come up with that projection?
Actually, Renaissance, who is the vendor of the STAR product, uses literally the millions of test results that they have, and they collect the CASP results for students as well. So they're able to see at various times of the year, including at the very beginning of the year for each grade, if a student scores here with the types of items that they saw on that adaptive test, they're most likely to score at this level when they take the CASP.
Okay.
So it's done through their data modeling and their data projection system, and it's available for all the teachers, site administrators, and district administrators in the system to be able to look at every time a test is given.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and touch a little bit on 11th grade then. 11th grade took the CASP this last year. What I'll start with is showing some of our similar measures to what we've seen before. Our percent meeting and exceeding is very similar to what we've seen before. There's a bit of a proviso here. That's preliminary data. The CDE is still working on the final set of late in the year test results. For us, this is about 95% of our data, so this will be pretty close to what's publicly out. Keep in mind that participation rates varied quite a bit for 11th grade. And that does have an impact for us, and I'll touch on that again in a moment. When we look at our percent not met, again, you'll see that very right-hand column in the chart is very similar to what we've had before. 1 percentage point actually to the better, slightly lower than the prior year. Again, our participation rates on this are going to have a bit of an impact. As we look at the chart on slide 12, we can see the percentages for each of the 6 years of CASP data in 11th grade. And note that the student counts in 2021 are significantly lower. A couple of our sites and students were trying very hard to get students tested. However, students would disconnect from the testing, not appear for tested scheduled sessions, other variety of reasons that they just did not participate. So because of that, we know that that number is a little bit inflated in our case. Looking at some historical data for these students, we would expect those percentages to be a bit lower. I know the board's probably interested in what we would project those percentages to be if they factored in. I would state that accurately doing that is extremely difficult since we would be using 8th grade results for an 11th grade student over 3 years of content. It'd be very difficult to state exactly where each student would fall. However, I can state with some certainty that the missing students would skew these results lower to the lower bands than what we currently see. However, the representative population is very similar to what we have seen before. And that is encouraging, stating that, a lot of those cases, those skills were carrying over from year to year and allowing students to still exceed, possible expectations of loss in some cases, or being able to continue to test at a proficient level. There are as well a variety of contributing factors, specifically at the high school level. Our quarter system that we utilized last year was certainly a benefit for students to be able to focus on content. There was increased pacing involved as well, which required students to attend very closely to their work. Again, those distance learning strategies, as we've already discussed, have been different, and some of our attendance issues still get into place. And you'll note there that bottom piece talks a little bit about the percentage difference in participation, but also the CDE switched to a short form of Smarter Balance last year. The adaptive portion was 50% less in item count. From a testing perspective, that's both a positive and a negative. Positive, students have less items, they can pay more attention to them, they'll be over more quickly. From a negative, it's less time to recover on an adaptive test. So getting off to a good start and answering questions correctly at the beginning is much more important in this shorter version. Before I move on to touch on to some student group information, would like to pause here for a moment and see if there's any questions about 11th grade.
No, I don't. Thank you.
And mine is not a question. Only I want to thank the Dr. Cole and the whole staff to put this same information in Spanish in the agenda option. That is not only helped our community, also helped me a lot. Thank you.
Oh, certainly. All right, well, let's take a moment and touch on student groups. You'll have much more information about this in the main report, but what we wanted to do is take a moment and show you those student group percentages, meets and exceeds, or at and above level as it relates to the three measures we've walked through. As you can see, there's a big difference between various student group performances. Some of those traditional gaps that we have had in our gap reports still exist for our students. We have needed support, for instance, for our Black, African American, and our Hispanic student groups on the ethnicity side. And note that our English learners and our students with disabilities still require some intervention and supports on the programmatic side. So we're very aware of this. We'll be touching on in a moment here some of the different actions that are going to be targeting not only some of these student groups, but also the groups as a whole. And again, you'll have significantly more information on this in the written report. We simply wanted to highlight a few of the overall levels at this point. So Dr. Kovac, I'd like to hand it back to you.
So for English language arts assertion, with respect to our results policy, meet or exceed state standards in academic achievement, I know here it says the superintendent certifies that the information is accurate and complete. It is, Dr. Sweezy, it is accurate and complete. And we really reflected on this assertion because it was a one year kind of, I hate to say that, one-off for the results, and we've identified that we're making reasonable progress with noted exceptions. And the reasons for that is the context of the pandemic and the school closure directly impacting our overall performance for our students at all levels. And those systems for distance learning instruction and intervention were implemented to minimize learning loss and unfinished learning. We put systems in place with our schedules last year to support that. However, the results, it really indicated there were multiple levels of reading intervention needs moving forward. We know that, and we'll talk more about those actions that we're putting in place to address that. And new strategies and systems deemed effective will continue to be implemented. As we said, there were some great things that came out of distance learning, so we want to ensure that we're going to continue implementing those strategies and practices that we felt were effective for our students. So I would really like to have some input or feedback from the board in regards to that assertion, being that it was 1 year, with those noted exceptions. Any comments or input?
As you can imagine, it was a difficult decision. Lots of discussion went into this recommendation. We really didn't feel as though we could say we were failing to make progress. And as Dr. Pfeffer and Dr. Kovacs pointed out, there are places that there was some progress. And that's why, again, they ended up with the recommendation, reasonable progress, but with the noted exceptions, and the noted exceptions being some of those obvious ones, but the school closure and distance learning.
I guess I have two questions. Do you, in your reflection coming up for this next year, see as a team, this is a transitional year and that we're seeing kids trying to go back to what we used to do? That would be question one, that it would be like reflecting on it as a transition year. And the other one was, was there any motivation or incentives for students for testing involved at all across the district and schools?
You know, the incentives for testing, I would
I
say.
can speak to that a little bit.
Oh, you can,
I
Dr.
actually
Pfeffer.
can.
Also, we
Yeah.
also have a very recent principal here who could share that as well.
Yeah. Actually, a number of sites were incentivizing participation in testing. When it came to the STAR test implementation at elementary and middle school, there were a number of different systems used. Some of them used some ticket systems with some drawings to make sure students would participate. Others were giving out in-class rewards in heavier volumes to encourage students to do their best and try their hardest. When it came to high school, similar items were put into place, a lot of different kind of tangible incentives, but also a couple of hopeful experiential incentives. Obviously, those were the experience side was somewhat limited because of lack of being able to bring groups together and that sort of thing from a public health perspective. But each site was designing different reward systems based on their internal needs and what had worked for them previously.
And in regards to this being a transition year, we know that we're really focusing on social emotional learning, the well-being of our students and staff, and getting them back into the routine of school, while at the same time ensuring that procedures and routines are in place and best first instruction. So it's that fine line of aligning efforts, but ensuring that students are feeling comfortable and safe on campus and not overwhelming them too much, is kind of that going slow to go fast this year.
In my opinion, also, it has to do with the staff. It's a transitional year for them too, being out of school for so long and just being back on campus and with kids actually in front of them, and teaching all day in a mask and having kids wear a mask all day. So it's something that did we ever expect to experience? And I don't think any teacher that's teaching now would have ever thought this is where we would be, but we are. And if you talk to people that are teaching and kids that are gone back to in person, they're all so excited. So I think there's a lot of hope that kids will, really be putting forth a good effort, and I know that teachers are. So I think it's a transition year for everybody, and I think it's including us on the board too, and people, in the district all over.
I agree with you. And as we visit schools and classrooms, there's excitement, but as you said, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Face coverings, masks, but students are excited, teachers are excited, there's instruction taking place, but you can also feel that priority of the well-being of students and staff on campus. So, okay. Oh, our next item, actions targeting academic improvement in English language arts. Mr. Arnold is going to take some time and review professional development. Also, some actions around a multi-tiered systems of support, which we began discussing the need for this framework and system in our district at the end of last year. And we've already, as a educational services department, been working to flesh out this system and develop this framework. And we've been having conversations with our principals, and we're going to take the time to flesh that out and to align all of our efforts in this area. So, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Arnold right now.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kovac. So we'll start by talking about professional development. So at the elementary school, we continue to work with Chris Tom. His focus this year is on aligned text-dependent questioning. At the middle school level, we are continuing to support the work that we've been doing with Orenda. So we're working on common assessment protocols, interim assessment alignment, and that is being supported mainly by our district personnel for this year. And at the high school level, we continue our solution tree work on professional learning community development, specifically within ELA and then within math as well. When we look at some of the supports that are in place, as Dr. Pfeffer already talked about, we have the STAR 360 assessment, which we're very excited about. It gives us that ability to have consistent progress monitoring over the course of the school year to see really if some of these interventions that we have in place are making that positive difference in student outcomes. We're actually using those STAR 360 assessments to identify some of the kids in that second strategy or action there, which is the reading intervention teachers, the elementary school reading intervention teachers, which is a new action this year. We have hired all 15 teachers, so every single one of our sites has a reading intervention teacher in place. We have purchased the Fontes and Pinnell reading intervention program, and all the curriculum, I think all the curriculum now, Ms. Whiteman, has been fully delivered. We were waiting on a couple 4th and 5th grade sets here, but I think now all has been delivered. We had our reading intervention teachers trained at the beginning of this month, and then some school sites also chose to send additional staff members to expand the program and expand the ability of the number of kids that they could serve. So they all received their training. Ms. Whiteman and myself have been out to about half of the elementary school sites specifically to look at the intervention program, and it's really going extremely well. And the feedback from teachers and staff has been extremely positive as well, so that's a great thing. The instructional coaches and content specialists continue with their work, really focusing on best first instruction, really aligned to the professional development that we spoke about up above. We have expanded the Mission Graduate Program, which we talked about. It no longer is specifically for our English learner students. It's now accessible to all students in our district that are in need. And right now we're serving just over 425 students, which is a great thing, a great asset to our students. We have various online programs. Some are kind of programs that we've used in the past, like Dreambox and Learning Dynamics. We've also worked to extend access to FEV tutoring and really making sure that kids 3rd through 12th grade are having access to that program. And we are recently adding in a varsity tutors program. Dr. Pfeffer talked about some of the concerns we saw specifically in 3rd grade. So this is a reading intervention program that will be online. We're going to do a pilot and just focus on 100 students in the district right now and really making sure that they'll stay actively engaged in that program. For social emotional learning and counseling supports at the counseling, we have hired an additional middle school and high school counselor at all of our sites. They're working on targeted tier 2 interventions, and then at the high school level, really working with that 9th through 10th grade focus group of students. And as far as program supports, our English learner programs, we continue to have our community liaisons and our language instruction programs that have been in place in the past to just continue to emphasize the needs over some of the situations that occurred last year. And then within special education, we really continue to focus on those inclusive practices for students. Any questions? Oh, sorry, I got the next slide, I forgot. Okay, so we have a number of upcoming additional action plans. So soon, actually at the end of this month, we will be presenting to you the ESSER 3 plan, which is federal funds again. 20% of that has to be used to address the impact of lost instructional time. So we'll be presenting that. We're kind of finalizing that at this point. Also, we have the Lcap Supplement. So we talked about the Lcap at the end of last school year. We now have, because of the way they're funding concentration dollars now, they've increased that to 65%, which means we have about another over $11 million that will be included in this Lcap Supplement. And the due date for that is like the end of February. Additionally, there's an A through G access grant plan that will be implemented, and I believe that due date, it just got moved. It originally was December, and I think it's now the end of January. And then we'll have year 2 of our current LCAP plan, which we'll really be reflecting on to make sure that the actions that we currently have in our plan are really addressing the needs of our students. Any questions or comments?
Okay, so we're moving on to mathematics.
So in mathematics, we know that traditionally we've had lower performance in mathematics than in English language arts, and we'll see that again in this results. That will come as no surprise given our trend. That being said, there are a couple of data points here that I'm going to highlight along the way that do show some potential for some very quick changes that could bring forward some positive results. It will be hard work. It'll be a different implementation, different focus, but it could certainly pivot us in the right direction. Some of that is also the strategic information that the STAR gives us as part of assisting students with those next steps. As with English language arts, we do see some of those similar performance gaps. We will see that impact as it relates to younger students having a larger decline than older students as it relates to some of our results. And we do know that there will be a significant need for tiered intervention as well. So as we start to look at the information, we'll see that the performance levels from the CASP potential, again, that projection of CASP scores from the STAR results in mathematics, much lower and much more significant numbers as we see them in that level 1 scoring. This would have been lower than what we've normally had pretty much across the board, with one exception, which I'll show you in just a moment. But that performance level still requires some significant impact and significant work in order to overcome. You can see on slide 21 where those gaps, similar to what we saw in ELA, also exist in mathematics. However, note, interestingly, in 8th grade, our proficiency, if you will, on that projection is almost identical to what our prior year CASP results came out to be. Similar numbers of students participating, so we're not looking at that same thing that we've seen in 11th grade for that coincidental number. So it's interesting to think about, those built-up skills, being able to apply those over time versus developing those skills. As we know, mathematics tends to stack as opposed to English language arts, which tends to cycle. A little bit different in the way you approach that instructional element. Also, when we think of mathematics instruction, especially in lower grades, really that timely interactive piece, a lot of using manipulatives, working in groups, that timely adjustment that a teacher can give a student in that visual piece, a little harder to do in distance learning with mathematics. So we do have some recovery here. However, when we look at it from an intervention perspective, note that the kids in that kind of middle part of the bell curve or higher in these overall national normed pieces, not just our data set, but across the board, indicate we have a lot more students that should be able to get there with first instruction. You can see those much higher numbers in the 30% across the board. What that states is, to me, from just the data side, is in mathematics, our approach needs to be more focused on first instructional practices that are going to pay off in bigger long-term numbers. We still have that need for that varied intervention set, and you'll hear that in the actions as well. But being able to address first instruction in mathematics, become more targeted in our approaches there, is going to be part of that equation. The STAR data gives us a full instructional plan report for every student and groups that we can make in the system that will help teachers target specific skills, specific next steps for students in intervention and first instruction that will help them to align that work moving forward. So we have some promise there in being able to use that formative data to be able to change those items. When it comes to other contributing factors, you'll see very similar items here to what we've seen in the English language arts portion of this presentation. One piece that I would note is with mathematics, the strategy differential is a bit more key here. Whereas skills that aren't necessarily mastered prior to school closures are going to be a little more difficult to recover without that interpersonal or that group and manipulative-based intervention structure. I went through that elementary and middle school data fairly quickly. However, I want to pause and see if we have any initial questions on that part of the data set.
I do. On the slide 21,
Yes.
you made the comment with math, it kind of builds on itself.
It does.
And why is the 2019 CASP, the percentages go down as the grade level goes higher?
Yeah, and you actually see that as a statewide trend, which is interesting. So keep in mind that Smarter Balance is written towards that application level or higher. So you're talking application, analysis, evaluation kind of work. That's different than just, can you solve the equation? So students are not rewarded as much in that manner if they just have the skills. They have to be able to use those skills in combination and also in situations. So when I'm posed with a word problem or those types of items, that might suggest that the approach to adjusting first instruction may be the better way to go, especially as we move to higher levels of grade levels. Part of the reason that the third grade results are also higher is there's a bit more of that skill-based piece down in third grade. They do still have those applied concepts, but a little bit more of the, are you able to execute, for instance, just multiplication? Are you able to execute an item that may involve adding multiple numbers in sequence? Doing some of those items. So some of it is the test construct, and some of it is probably also first instructional patterns. But again, I want to clearly state that that is a trend that's seen across the state as declining. And then it peaks back up a little bit in 11th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jim, did you talk about the math performance tasks? And I saw that as a really difficult challenge for students as I tested last spring. And what are we doing in STAR to prepare for those tasks?
Yeah, so STAR does not provide performance tasks. So that's where our teams would be using other tools such as the IABs, the interim assessment blocks that have performance tasks within them, utilizing tools from the curriculum materials that create those scenarios. I know for a fact that our mathematics TOSAs in secondary have been working through some work with Smarter Balance material and performance tasks specifically in previous trainings that they've been working with some of the math leads and some of the math teachers on implementing in the classroom as well. So I think that's one of those developing systems piece, but that exposure point and being able to address a large scenario with a plan, an executed plan, and then communicating about that plan is kind of the three aspects to completing that mathematics performance task. So in 11th grade, to move forward, again, we're seeing similar results to what we've seen before. And again, I'll factor in our participation rates as part of this analysis. However, it's clear that many of our students were able to maintain their proficiency levels, both with our math overall meets and exceeds and with our students in the not met range. We're seeing similar numbers to what we would have seen before. Note that, again, this will skew slightly as we look at our different student counts. You'll note that they are lower than what they traditionally would be. And again, we would expect, based on historical data, that that number would skew slightly to the lower end, the magnitude of which, again, very hard to calculate, being a 3-year extrapolation from their last test. So similar to English language arts, in math, we can see a number of students that are able to show that they can perform at similar levels to what their previous cohorts were able to do, those representative of those groups that participated. Similarly, in 11th grade, we have a number of different factors. Really, in mathematics, the fact that this is a 3-year scope test is also something to keep in mind. So students missing out on any portion of that integrated mathematics 2 and didn't get exposed to part of integrated mathematics 3 would have a larger impact on their mathematics results. Keep in mind that many of our 11th grade students would have been on distance learning for the last quarter of IM2 and most of IM3. Depending on what their schedule distribution was, that can also change that with the quarter system that we used. Otherwise, you'll see various similar things to what was stated in English language arts here, including that shorter version of the test as discussed before. Gaps, again, exist as we would expect them to based on prior results, and those are reflected here as well. Note again that our ethnicity differentials are pretty significant. They are something that we do still need to target and work on, as well as our programmatic differences in performance, especially as it relates to English learners and students with disabilities, being two primary program target groups. Dr. Kovach, I'll hand it back over to you.
And once again, for the assertion, as we talked about that reflection, we are also want to state that the district is making reasonable progress with noted exceptions. Similar to English language arts, with the pandemic and the closure impacting our overall performance for students, and also putting a system in place for intervention and trying to minimize learning loss. However, we know that these efforts really were different across the district in regards to attendance and just the struggles with really some of that hands-on work that is needed in mathematics, being that we were not in person. So once again, making reasonable progress with noted exceptions. And what I really want to focus on is knowing that that's a priority. Mathematics, academics is a priority, but knowing that's a priority for the board, and we've had quite a few conversations about that. We want to highlight some of the actions that we've put in place to address that. And Mr. Arnold's going to provide more information about those.
Okay, thank you, Dr. So we'll speak first about the professional development. So we're continuing with the high impact math at the elementary level. It's a tiered based on how many years the schools have been involved with the program. So some are having lesser days with the consultants than other schools that need more intensive approach. At the middle school level, we continue with kind of what we talked about in ELA with the content and curriculum alignment, kind of continuing to perpetuate the work that we did with Orenda. The other piece that we're beginning a pilot is we knew that maybe it's me. We knew that we were having great success with the high impact program at the elementary level, so really working to get that carried over into the middle school, at least at the 6th grade level. And basically based on the consultants, we're calling it a pilot because we're able to do that based on their time at 2 of our middle school sites. So we're beginning that work, and we're excited about what we're hearing, specifically with one site that's been already had a couple training sessions with those folks. And then at solutions or at high school level, we're continue to work with Solutions Tree on PLC development, specifically focused around math. You'll see that a lot of the supports that we have in place are consistent with what we had at the ELA level or ELA as well. I do want to speak a little bit to the middle school and high school mathematics intervention teachers, which is something we talked about at the end of last school year. We knew there'd be a few more challenges in hiring those teachers, just having that math degree. So we have fully hired now all the middle school teachers. One has yet to begin because they just were hired, I believe, last week. And at the middle school level, we have those intervention teachers in place at 3 of our high schools. I will say a couple of the high schools made the decision. They felt that they wanted to hire an additional math teacher and use their current staffing to support the intervention and that PLC work. So, and we certainly were in support of that program as well. So here we're getting a very close monitoring of the results on common assessments within both the middle school and high school math programs, and then really working on identifying those essential standards and then front-loading skills, reinforcing skills or reteaching of skills, and also enrichment around those essential standards. We're really working to make sure that this is consistently rolled out across all the middle school sites and high school sites. I'll give a shout out to Mr. Rivera in the back there because he's helped to kind of create some of the middle school program, along with our math TOSAs as well, have really helped to support and create consistency from site to site, which is something that we were really focusing on.
And Mr. Arnold, are you going to share that you and Dr. Killian are also?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I forgot. So Dr. Killian and I have been out to the majority of our high school sites to basically really look at these intervention programs and make sure to see how they're being facilitated, and really have been very impressed. And again, the feedback that we're getting back from both the general ed teachers and the intervention teachers has been extremely positive. They're really seeing a benefit from the program. So that's all been positive. And I think our middle school visits are scheduled here in the next couple of weeks.
Anything about the additional action plans for math?
You know, again, the same plans are there in place, and I think one thing, as Dr. Kovac said, we are kind of exploring, or I'm exploring some different professional development opportunities that we're looking at to kind of systematically take an approach at the math program, specifically at the secondary level. So, any questions?
I had a question, and it's overall, it's not math, it's related to ELA. Before Dr. Sandy left, we spoke about writing specifically and about we don't have a state writing test anymore for 4th and 7th grade, and how are we supporting students with writing? And we spoke about that over the past years, and I'm wondering what you can offer about the subject under ELA of writing, if you can.
Well, first of all, there is that expectation of evidence-based writing across all schools, so we've communicated that. The delivery of writing instruction is a little different at each school site, but in regards to elementary school, they have all developed their plans, K through 5 for writing, and at this time, we have 1 to 2 schools, one in particular, Rio Vista, who is really, I kind of like to say they're piloting. It's not a pilot for us, but they're really focusing on a writer's workshop model and beginning professional development in that area, as well as Landau. They are also beginning that work, and we're looking at that very closely to determine if that is the type of system or structure or professional development we would want to continue with other school sites the following year. Anything else you want to say about writing? Okay.
Can I speak to the assessment side
Yes.
real quick? So we mentioned the performance test previously. The performance test does have a full write component, and as we return to normal CASP assessment, part of the data set now includes the students' score results from that written component. So we are, although we don't have a 4th grade writing test any longer, 7th grade writing test any longer, we actually now have a 3 through 8 and 11 set of writing results that will be coming in out of our CASP data. That's actually a bit wider than what we had previously. And many of our sites already are using the Smarter Balanced rubrics for how those items are scored as part of their instruction and their assessment of writing. Now that's expanding still. We're still working with sites and teams on becoming familiar, but a number of them are already using that tool to help base their writing instruction. In the case of CASP, we actually often get a bit of a boost when it comes to the implementation of the performance task. So looking forward to seeing whether that has an impact on some of these results moving forward as well.
We're getting there, Board Clerk Jarrell, I promise.
One more thing.
And that ends our presentation, but I just want to remind the board that you also have benchmark 1, our results from the STAR, in your binder there. So you have that information there for you to review. Any questions, any additional questions or comments from the board about this process again? I know it's the Senate table.
Well, I'll make a comment. It's been an extraordinary year, difficult year for everybody. Personally, I think saying that we met expectations is a stretch. We clearly haven't, and you guys know that. This had to be a pretty tough report to give, I would think. But what this report does is it puts a spotlight on this, and you guys go out there and the entire staff go out there and we'll do whatever we can to get it fixed and to bring these results back up to standard.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's our goal.
All right.
Thank you for the comprehensive answers. And I know I gave you some answers that maybe challenged you or questions, but it's really good for me to hear the idea that this is a transition year and that maybe the numbers might not all align with the stars the way we want to see them, but we have to remember that it may take, I think you said, Mr. Pfeffer, 3 years, 3 to 5?
Yeah, I would advise that we look at the next at least 2 to 3 years as rebound to attempt to get back to where we were, and then from there looking to have that push forward. Hopefully we can expedite that, but given normal trends on this type of thing, when we're talking about a new testing system coming into place, it's usually 3 years before we really know how that operates. I would almost think of this as a reset and is similar to what's been discussed today. So, yeah.